I debated for a long time about sharing this. June is Men's Mental Health Month, and this was filmed in August. And at 42 years old, this is the first time that I've ever suffered a bout of depression. I had asked my 12-year-old daughter, Adeline, to come out in the shop with me because I'm building this desk for her. But more than that, I knew that it wasn't healthy for me to be alone. In the middle of talking about the desk, I just broke down uncontrollably sobbing, and she hugged me through it. I decided to share this because I just wanted to say it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to not be okay and not let anyone know about it. Adeline is starting the 7th grade, and as a virtual student, which is kind of the same as homeschool except still affiliated with her public school, she needed a desk to do her work at. We spent a few minutes out in the shop coming up with a design, and her requirements were it needed to have a drawer, and she wanted the top to double as an easel because she loves to draw and paint. I've had this live edge spalted pecan slab in the shop for several years now, and I always intended it to be a desktop, and this was the perfect project. So I cleaned up one side of it, knocking the loose bark off, and then ripped off the other side to give it a straight edge. Because the slab wasn't completely flat, I had to knock together a flattening jig big enough to fit it in, using some scrap plywood and screws. I don't know what I was singing there, but apparently I was in a better mood. And I used some scrap pieces of wood to shim up the corners to keep the piece from rocking. Then I used a little hot glue to keep it from moving around. For the carriage that holds the router and slides back and forth on the flattening jig, I used some 3/4 scrap plywood and a table saw to cut out a giant cutout for the 2-inch router bit, flattening bit that I'm going to be using. And then screwed some strips of 3/4 plywood to give it some strength and rigidity. Then I spent about an hour flattening the slab, both sides. I don't know much about pouring epoxy on slabs, but what I do know I learned from YouTube. And I know that you have to remove all the loose debris before you pour the epoxy. During the flattening process, this corner broke off and, well, I just glued it back on. Some of the knot holes and the cracks go all the way through the slab, so I added some tuck tape on the bottom to keep the epoxy from pouring out on the floor. Total boat, baby. If any of you are fans of Keith Johnson, you get that reference. But this is not Total Boat. This is a cheap epoxy set that I picked up off of Amazon. I didn't add any colored pigment because I wanted it to be clear and for her to be able to see all the way through the knot holes from top to bottom. While the epoxy cured, I moved on to the rest of the desk, which is all made out of white oak. After using the miter saw to cut them just slightly oversized and a couple of passes on the joiner to give it a straight edge, I cut them to width using the table saw. My bandsaw is large enough to resaw these boards, but I find that I get a better cut if I cut through with the table saw and then flip it end for end and continue raising that up until I only have a little bit left in the middle to cut off with the bandsaw. And as long as I remember to resaw it slightly larger than the thickness I actually need, I can use the planer to take off that little tab that's left and then plane it down to the actual thickness that I want it. Because I'm always trying to learn new techniques on personal or shop projects, I decided to use sliding dovetails as the method of joinery. I stuck some blue tape to the fence to know the start and stop point and used a 1/4-inch router bit to remove most of the material before I came back with this little dovetail bit to cut in the grooves. Once the dovetail mortises were cut, I put it on a tapering jig and I could cut out the taper of each leg that I desired. After squaring up the ends and cutting to length the pieces that I resawed earlier, I took them to the router table and cut in some dovetail tenons. This was probably the most challenging part of this project, and if I were to do it again, I wouldn't use the dovetail mortise and tenon. I would just use regular mortise and tenons. Like any good woodworker, or bad one in this case, I made a mistake and cut one of the dovetails too deep. So instead of remaking the entire piece, I cut a short piece with the dovetail and then glued and drove it all the way down to fill up that gap. While the glue dried on that fix, I cut the oversized pieces with the dovetail tenons down to their proper size. And then I sanded down the part of the fix that was sticking up proud of the leg. I added a 1/4-inch roundover on all sides of the legs. And then I removed about 1 inch off of each one of the dovetail tenons. I cut the mortises about 1 inch short of the overall height of the piece so that it would, when I slid them in, it would have a flushed look. I cleaned up the little tab that was left from the bandsaw cut and hand fit each one of these dovetails using a chisel. After dry fitting to check the fit, I disassembled, added some glue, and then started reassembling, starting with the back legs and the back stretcher. And then I moved to the front legs and the side stretchers. The front stretcher is not quite as tall as the back and the side stretchers, leaving room underneath to add a drawer. And once I added the back legs to the side stretchers, I could flip it over and see the completed base of the desk. In order to allow the top to hinge up to create the easel effect, I had to build a base for the slab to connect to. So, milling more white oak. Once it was milled to the proper thickness, I could drill a pivot point hole and then use that pivot point hole and a circle cutting jig to cut out a half moon that will allow the top to swivel up and down. Back at the tapering jig, I cut off the excess material and then clamped the sides to the base in the proper location to use that pivot point hole as the locating hole for the bolt, the pivot bolt. After drilling out those pivot holes to the proper thickness, I think it was a 1/4 inch, I countersunk and added some of these threaded inserts to the inside of each one of the sides of the top. Then I drilled out the corresponding locations on the front legs for those pivot bolts. I know it seems like I'm jumping around a little bit, but I wanted to add some bow tie inlays to the cracks on the slab on the top of the desk. I think the epoxy is enough to hold it, so it doesn't have to be super structural. And I had some of this leopard wood that someone gave to me a long time ago that I've held on to, and I thought it would look beautiful on top of this desk. So instead of bow ties, I'm going to inlay her initials. Adding a 1/4 inch piece of plexiglass to the bottom of this palm router and some handles gave me much better control while I was routing out the inlays. Use the bandsaw to cut out the outside of the letters, and then the scroll saw to cut out the inside of the letters. This took a bit of time and patience and a lot of sanding and hand fitting, but I finally got them to fit and they turned out really great. For attaching the slab to the sides, I went with pocket holes over Z-fasteners simply because I wanted a stronger bond than just those Z-fastener clips. This still will allow me to change out the top in the future if I need to. Once I had the sides of the top bolted to the base, I could mark the location for the holes for the bolts that are going to keep the top from falling back down when it's in the upright position. I had to make some wooden washers that go over that bolt hole so that when they were tightened down, it wouldn't cause the sides to bow in. It would just tighten down onto this piece of leopard wood. I had to round off the top corner of the front legs to allow that base to hinge upwards without hitting that corner. And this is a clip of the actual first test to see if the idea would work. But I had to make it easier for her to loosen and tighten these bolts. What fancy desk wouldn't be complete without some mahogany? And this scrap piece was perfect for creating some knobs for those bolts. I started partially through with a Forstner bit the size of the head of the bolt and then finished it with a Forstner bit the size of the bolt. And then with a larger bit, drilled on all 4 sides, all the way through. And then cutting out the center of each one of those circles created a 4-point knob, which I then used double-side tape to stick down to the table in order to safely put a round over on each side. Then I added a nut on the inside, tightened the screw down into the nut, and then added some CA glue to keep it from backing out. I filled any tiny pinholes with CA glue, did a final sanding to 180 grit, and then for finish used Rubio Monocoat. And last was the drawer that doubles as an armrest, so milling more white oak. Instead of milling down white oak for the bottom of the drawer, I have these red oak strips that I use to make bench scrapers out of that are exactly a 1/4 inch thick. And I thought that would be fine, so I cut a 1/4 inch dado for the bottom and then rabbets on the ends of the sides. While the glue on the 1/4 inch panel dried, I started assembly on the drawer. For added strength, I added 3/8 inch oak dowels on each corner. To measure for the exact width of the drawer, I stacked both side-mounted drawer slides together and I could get the exact measurement. For the 1/4 inch bottom, I stacked 2 story sticks together and then fumbled around looking for my pencil so that I could mark those and then pull them out, and I would have the exact measurement for the bottom. Using those 2 measurements, I cut the sides of the drawer and the bottom, slid the bottom in, and then finished the drawer. To add the drawer slides, I cut a scrap piece to the proper height and used it as kind of a setup block so that both sides would match. For final assembly, I added a brass bushing, a bolt, brought the top over, set it in place, and then I could tighten these bolts into those threaded inserts. And then my youngest, Penelope, came out to the shop to show me how to properly apply Rubio Monocoat. and then I countersunk and screwed the drawer front into place.
It looks so good. It smells really good though.
Yeah, that's the finish.
I like it. Wait, I'm gonna.
Yeah, I thought it smelled like super heavy.
How do I-
Super strong
Oh,
high
I've got them tightened down so that it wouldn't.
How do I? Lefty loosey, righty tighty.
Yep, just barely open them.
Barely. Oh.
Did it come all the way out? We had to start it back.
No,
in.
it's just loose.
Okay. Raise it up.
That's so cool.
Lock it in place.
That's so cool. Is it like a canvas thing?
It's so cool.
Now pull your drawer out.
I don't think it will come out. Yeah, it won't come out.
Oh, you have to do that before you
I
put
was
the
like-
top back down.
I was like,
no, I built it that way, so you have to.
Kind of like my dresser.
Ooh, I don't want to get
Let it down. You can let it down. Now pull your drawer out.
It's so clean.
It smells good.
Yeah, I helped.
Oh,
Yeah, I put that on. Yeah, Daddy said I
Yeah,
could
this
put
only needs to be just barely out. And then just raise it.
Yeah, I put that on. Here, let me record it.
And then I can like put my elbows right here.
You need a
I'm
chair.
not free. You're in
Yeah,
the
But you know, Adeline, we're gonna buy a chair. I'm not building a chair.
It's okay. It's okay. See, I can like do this.
See, is that enough, or do you need something on that?
I might need to get something a little bit more because I feel like my elbows are too big. I have
I
fat
don't think
elbows.
that you're ever gonna use this. in
Daddy,
this
should
position.
I think I
record
could
it?
draw because some people actually do draw like this.
Should I record
I haven't tried it because I didn't have. I don't like to set up my.
Adeline, are you happy?
I love it.
I love it.
I'm
It's
so
so
excited. I'm so
pretty.
excited to get all my stuff.
Thank
into
you
the-
both for helping me build.
I'm so excited to put my stuff in here.
Subscribe.
And what else?
Uh-huh.
What else?
Like, subscribe, hit that post notification bell so you never miss a video.
All right. See you guys.